6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, and I wish you a peaceful Advent Sunday. We've arrived in the final month of the year. Frost is in the air, snow is on the ground, and Christmas trees glisten around us. If you're decking the halls with holly today or simply cosy by the fire, you're very welcome here on Sunday with Michael Portillo for 2 hours of arts, culture, politics and discussion. The axing of the Transport Secretary Louise Haigh is just the latest train crash to affect this accident-prone government. It seems that an opportunity for its opponents to drive it out of office at the next election is growing. But Donald Trump's long-term associate, Steve Bannon, predicts that Nigel Farage will be our next Prime Minister. Does the division of the political right in Britain between Reform UK and the Conservative Party mean that Labour can count on surviving, however poor its performance in office? I'll ask my panel. Honorary colonels of the Army Cadet Force have written an open letter warning that the future of the organisation is at risk after 50% of its funding has been cut since 2020. I'll be joined by Colonel Andrew Wallace to explain what impact that could have. As we commence our Yuletide celebrations, I'll be joined by food historian Pen Fogler to discuss what a Dickensian Christmas in Victorian London was like. And Stefan Kyriazis will make a theatrical return to this programme to talk us through his latest outings in London's West End. But before all of that, your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you very much and good morning. The top stories. Well, some MPs who backed the assisted dying bill have indicated they could consider changing their mind along the process amid concerns over palliative care provision and safeguarding. MPs will be able to suggest amendments to the legislation when it moves into its next parliamentary step, the committee stage. Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, told GB News there's still a long way to go.
Now that Parliament's voted on that on Friday, it will go into committee. It will be considered in much more detail now, like every other piece of legislation, and it should be because it's such a serious issue. And the House of Commons will have to vote on it again in a few months' time. So this bill, this big and serious measure, will be properly and fully considered clause by clause now, as it should be. And even though we had the vote on Friday, I still think there's probably a long way to go before this becomes law.
Pat McFadden also suggested that questions over costs of assisted dying plans could be among the things discussed in the next stage of the process. Shadow Environment Secretary Victoria Atkins, who voted in favour, says it's a good idea to be having this conversation.
We saw across the House, from both those who voted aye, but also those who voted no, there was, for example, a real wish to see conversations about palliative care and the quality of palliative care continue. I think we also saw many heartbreaking examples. And there'll be, viewers at home that have been personally affected by this, where they just want to see whether the law can get into a better place than it is at the moment.
In other news, the Prime Minister says a new phase for his government will begin this week under what he calls a plan for change for Britain. Sir Keir Starmer is set to announce he'll reform the public sector and overhaul Whitehall when he makes a major speech marking the next phase of government. The Prime Minister will announce the markers for his so-called missions that Number 10 says will allow the public to hold Sir Keir and his team to account on their manifesto promises. It has been suggested these moves will influence decisions for next year's spending review. Greg Wallace has responded to the mounting allegations against him in a defiant video posted online, saying the accusations come from middle-class women of a certain age. Wallace, who stepped back from presenting the BBC cooking show MasterChef after accusations he made sexual comments towards staff and celebrity guests on a range of programmes over 17 years, says he worked with more than 4,000 contestants over the years of all different ages, background and walks of life. The BBC is now facing fresh questions over its handling of allegations against him after emails emerged showing it was warned about him in 2017. According to the Sunday Times, the broadcaster Asma Mir complained about inappropriate comments he'd allegedly made during filming of Celebrity MasterChef. Wallace's lawyers strongly deny he engaged in sexually harassing behaviour, while the BBC says it will always listen if people want to make them aware of something directly.
In the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef.
And the Princess of Wales has delivered her first Christmas message in the form of a letter ahead of her annual carol service. In that message to those planning to attend the service next week, she says love is the greatest gift people can give one another. This appearance will be Princess Catherine's most prominent return to royal engagement since undergoing preventative chemotherapy. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. It is back to Portillo.
Thank you very much to Tiana Sanchez. 3 million people have signed a petition declaring that they feel hoodwinked by Labour's election campaign and demanding a new poll. Few commentators have a good word for the new government, which on Friday lost a cabinet minister convicted of a fraud. The government's opponents are facing an open goal. But as Kemi Badenoch's speech on controlling immigration made on Wednesday indicated, the Conservatives know that they have to outflank Nigel Farage's Reform UK party without splitting in the process. Mrs Badenoch offered tough policy possibilities, such as leaving the European Court of Human Rights, but did not commit to such radical policies. Meanwhile, Farage is striding the world stage, much favoured by President-elect Trump, while Elon Musk tweets about Nigel's broadcasts on GB News. There's talk of Musk handing Reform UK $100 million. With that sort of clout, can the Conservatives hope to elbow Farage aside? I'm joined by my panel, political commentator Stella Santiago, the former UKIP and Social Democratic Party MEP Patrick O'Flynn, and broadcaster and journalist Candice Holdsworth. Patrick, I might go to you first, given your background as an MEP and so on. How do you rate the problem that the Conservative Party has, as I say, in elbowing Farage aside?
Well, I think it's big and it's become worse. I think I was here a month or so ago predicting Kemi Badenoch would have a poll bounce for the Tories. If she has, it's barely perceptible, a couple of points. And two big things have happened since then. First, Donald Trump got elected, but not a normal win. He won a clean sweep. The Electoral College, the popular vote, both houses of Congress already had a Supreme Court majority, and that has sent shockwaves around the world, and I think it echoed what had happened in the Netherlands in 2023, in Italy in 2022, and there's a large possibility that the British electorate will be thinking, I quite like the look of this, particularly on issues like border control. Who have we got that's kind of in sympathy with that? And obviously Nigel Farage has enormous advantages. And then the second really big thing that's happened to disadvantage Kemi Badenoch is the revised ONS migration statistics that came out on Thursday. And, you know, enormous levels of net migration in one 12-month period, more than 900,000, the equivalent of the entire population of our second city, Birmingham, being added to the UK population just through migration, but immigration, even net of emigration at that scale. And this was a catastrophic loss of control, quite deliberate. Obviously, Boris Johnson must bear the biggest share of blame. Rishi Sunak carried on in the same vein. Total contravention of the mandate upon which they were elected, and it's not as even as most of the people coming in were economic super contributors or culturally well aligned. And I think there's enormous anger out there, and Farage is canny enough to profit from that, even without Elon Musk's largesse.
Stella, what do you make of it? I mean, as a figure, you know, who instinctively supports the right, it seems to me that the Trump election has opened up possibilities for the right. I mean, for example, on immigration, also, I think, on net zero. And so on the face of it, you think, well, Kemi Badenoch is quite well placed here because she can probably say things that maybe a few months ago she couldn't have dared to say because the space has been opened up. And yet, it seems that Farage has the advantage. Now, you see it from a very different political perspective. How do you see it?
Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative Party are not an insurgent populist party. Kemi Badenoch has nothing to do with someone like Donald Trump. She simply doesn't have the movement that he has behind him. And if I dare to say so, she doesn't have some of the charisma that seems to appeal to people because she has been seen as someone who is trying to emulate what Nigel Farage is doing. And this is not something that the voters like. Also, the problem with Kemi Badenoch is that she's coming from a party that has been in power for 14 years. And a lot of people in good faith voted for that party time and time again, expecting it to do the things that they had done, namely to reduce immigration down to 100,000 a year, which they failed to do. In fact, it has quadrupled, more than quadrupled. So she has failed to do the humble thing, which she should have done as soon as the elections was over and as soon as the Conservative Party realized the sheer failure in the electoral strategy. They should have done some soul searching and come back and said, this is what we did wrong. This is how we're going to change. I'm still looking for an explanation from the Conservative Party about why they have failed with their immigration policy, why they have been lying to the public, what was the reasoning behind it, and what happened there really, what happened in the Home Office, what happened in their policy. And this simply never came.
Candice, that is tough talk there from Stella. And one of the reasons they haven't given an explanation is they spent 4 months having a leadership election, so there was no one really to speak for them. But what do you make of Stella's analysis there?
Well, I find it very interesting that you're seeing on the left now this sort of criticism of the Conservatives for failing on immigration. I mean, look at Keir Starmer. Look at the language he used when he came out after the upward revision of the ONS migration figures. His speech was like, we are going to be tough. We're going to have tough borders. We're going to enforce immigration. This is the language I associate with old Labour more than new Labour. You know, I mean, all the people that I know, particularly Northern Labour people, often trade unionists, they're very small C Conservative on immigration. They think it has a dampening effect on wages. Some of them also talk about the cultural changes that immigration brings, but you've never really seen it from the New Labour movement since 1997 onwards. Keir Starmer is striking a very different note, and I think it's because he realises the mood has shifted, and there is a new common ground on immigration in Britain and in America, which will benefit him particularly if the Conservatives have been discredited on this issue.
Well, Patrick, despite what Stella said a moment ago, actually part of what Kemi said in her speech on Wednesday was that they got it wrong in immigration. I agree she can give an explanation as to how or why they got it wrong. Kemi Badenoch, I mean, a few weeks ago, one was thinking maybe she was going to be a new Margaret Thatcher. Maybe she still could be. But this is a worrying moment for her, I think.
It's hugely worrying, and I'm not convinced at all by Keir Starmer becoming a mass migration sceptic. I just think he realises now he's got enormous political room, right? He can reduce net immigration from 800,000 or 900,000 to 400,000, which is still crazily irresponsible, and turn around and honestly say to the British public, these idiot Tories completely lost control. I've halved net immigration. You know, the boiled frog analogy, the water's still pretty hot there, but he can get away with saying that. And the defeated Tory election candidate, Robert Jenrick, is much more of the view that this is a real totemic failure by the Conservatives, and just saying, whoops, and we'll come back to you in a few years with some more cautious policies, isn't remotely going to discharge the betrayal. And it could be a Black Wednesday of social policy here, and the blame could last for a decade or more.
Let me just squeeze Stella in. How do you feel on Candice's point that indeed Labour seems to be saying that mass immigration is a huge mistake and the way forward is to cut it pretty drastically? How do you feel about that?
I think it's nonsense that the Labour Party and the left have not been talking about this. In 2015, Ed Miliband was in great trouble because of the printed Labour merchandise. We had these caps that said controls on immigration, and this was considered a massive scandal. And that's because that was part of the Labour manifesto all the way back then. And that is because the left, old Labour, as we just said, as Candice just said, did recognise that there needs to be controls on immigration. People need to feel like they're in control of who is coming in the country. I'm an immigrant myself. I benefited massively from coming to this country. I hope there has been no harm done to this country by me being here. And I think that immigration can be a very positive thing, but I think it's only fair that the country has control of it and that it says the truth about what's going on there. And I think, for me, what happened with the Conservative Party is that a lot of their funders and a lot of these business people that they were trying to appease and they were trying to lure in to donate to their own party were pro-complete open borders.
Very good. Candice has been shortchanged, but you're coming back in a moment. I'll make sure I make it up to you then. That's Stella Sanchez-Quito, Patrick O'Flynn and Candice Holdsworth. Coming up, Army cadet chiefs are warning that the future of the organisation is at risk because funding has been slashed. One of the honorary colonels who wrote an open letter to newspapers will be with me. This is Sunday with Michael Portillo, only on GB News.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
After the Hollywood ending that Wrexham Football Club have got, can Chorley FC benefit from a bit of the old celebrity magic dust?
I can't see why not. The guys have been down a few times now, and when they do come down, obviously they're bringing that with them. A little town like Chorley doesn't see much of the charts and big stars, so it's really nice to see them, and we always welcome them when they do come down.
And Mark, give us a flavour of the level of football. I understand you're in the National League North, right? That's 6 rungs down from the top flight. I mean, you're only just down the road from Manchester City, right? But I mean, give us a flavour of the two different worlds between your club and Man City.
Our players are all part-timers. So we've got kind of fitness coaches, we've got teachers, we've got all kinds of players who have full-time jobs alongside playing. Our average crowd is probably a tenth of what you get at Man City, probably even less than that. We get about 1,500 on a home game. The thing is, we know where we are and we understand where we are, and we are a real community club. Tonight, I'm ready now. I'm off to Marine, so off over to Merseyside. Playing the likes of Liverpool and Everton over on Merseyside would be kind of a dream come true. But we know where we are. We would just love to get to the Football League. So teams like Salford, Stockport County were in our division a couple of years ago, all flying now in the Football League. We just want to do the same. We sat down with the board last year and they told us the vision for the future, and that vision most definitely is that we want to be a Football League club. When we went to the Premier League, I know the boys have been saying that they 30 years will be in the Premier League and winning it. Well, let's hope we are, and let's hope I'm still around to see that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. The Army Cadet Force can trace its history back to 1859 and was initially formed as a volunteer force against the threat of French invasion. The organisation has developed over the years and now encourages around 74,000 cadets to take part in field work, adventure training and first aid, amongst other activities that involve discipline and teamwork. The future of the organisation has come under threat after a 50% of its funding from the Ministry of Defence was cut. The MOD says that it takes very seriously the concerns raised by the cadets, but the impact is already being felt, with some cadet forces reducing the number of activities that they can offer. And in an open letter, the heads of 25 Army Cadet forces across the country have urged the government to restore the funding. One of them is Colonel Andrew Wallace, and he joins me now. Andrew, welcome to GB News.
Michael, good morning to you.
For people who don't know much about cadets, tell us a little bit about what they do and why you think what they do is important.
As you've already said, this movement was set up 165 years ago with a prime aim of giving these young people life skills, preparing them for the workplace, generally setting them up as good members of society. People tend to think of the cadet movement as being a cheap recruitment tool to get people into the armed services. Somewhere in the region of only 4 or 5% ever go through to a full career in the military. So that's not its prime purpose. This is about giving life skills to young people. And very often those skills are given to young people in the most deprived areas of the country. As a movement, the putting on of a uniform is a great leveler. So we have, in my own region, out in Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, we have inner city units in Luton where you have every skin colour you can think of, every religious background you can think of, brought together in common purpose. And these units actually lead to the reducing of racial and religious tensions in these areas. So it is massively detrimental to see a scheme which is tried, tested and proven over all these years and has been independently looked at to make sure that it is delivering value for money, is now being effectively defunded, as we've seen over the last 5 years, something like a 50% cut.
But Andrew, if I were still Chief Secretary of the Treasury, rather than if I were still Secretary of State for Defence, having held both positions, I would say that your answer has given away why the Ministry of Defence is cutting its funding. Because if you say that only 5% go on into the military, why should the Ministry of Defence fund what is basically a social project, however good it is?
You raise a very good point. The open letter that was written by not me, but a wonderful man called Simon Banks Cooper, who is the honorary colonel for Humberside in South Yorkshire, he very eloquently set out that this scheme, yes, nominally funded by the Ministry of Defence, sees huge sums of savings flowing back into other departments other than the Ministry of Defence. So the Home Office, work and pensions, housing, all of these other departments get the benefit. And the government themselves said it was worth some £683 million of benefit versus the £180 million that it cost. So it is a massively successful scheme. But yes, you're absolutely right. The Ministry of Defence doesn't see those benefits. So it calls for wiser heads than mine to look at this holistically at government level, recognise, as they have already done, that this benefits society hugely, and to see that that funding can be perhaps cross-funded by the other departments who actually get the benefit.
You're asking the government to act holistically, which is probably the most difficult demand you could make of government, I'm afraid to say, rather pessimistically. But tell me this, is there no opportunity to up the connection between the cadets and the armed forces? Can't we get more people, having had this great experience that you've described, can't we have more of them going through to the military?
One end of government is slashing the size of the military almost on an annual basis. So the opportunities to serve become less and less. But no, you're absolutely right. It is still a great career for young people to go into. And the more barriers that are put in place to stop them realizing the great benefits that can be gained through schemes such as the cadets, the harder it will become to actually get people to join our defence against the rest of the world.
Colonel Andrew Wallace, thank you very much, and if I may say so, good luck.
Thank you very much indeed.
Up next, Charles Dickens' love for Christmas is well known. Food historian Pen Vogler will join me to share more about how Dickens was able to weave food into his remarkable works. This is Sunday with Michael Portillo, only on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see quite a showery day across the UK today, quite breezy too, but temperatures well above the seasonal average. Low pressure's anchored towards the northwest of the UK at the moment, and that's feeding these bands of rain in from the west. Quite a cloudy picture on the whole across the UK today. Those bands of showers working their way east across most areas, interspersed by some bright or sunny spells. And the brisk winds we've seen, especially towards the north and northwest, gradually easing as we go through the day. Staying fairly blustery though, and pretty mild for the time of year too. Temperatures in the low to mid-teens Celsius, peaking at 14, perhaps even locally 15 Celsius down towards the south. 15 is 59 in Fahrenheit. As we go through the evening into the overnight period on Sunday, further bands of showers will work in from the west. We'll just start to see some cooler weather tucking in towards the far north of Scotland. So to end the day on Sunday, it's quite a showery picture here. Some of those showers on the heavy side, but notice temperatures holding up at 9 or 10 degrees, so still fairly mild. There'll be some clear spells across Northern Ireland, showers mainly out towards the west here. Whereas across Wales, a very showery end to the day. Again, some of those showers on the heavy side. Elsewhere across the south and southeast, a mixture of clear spells and some showers. And once again, fairly mild for the time of year. So as we go through the evening into the overnight period, those bands of showers continue their way eastwards across all areas, and we do start to see some colder air just tucking into the far north, so the showers across the high ground in Scotland starting to turn wintry by Monday morning. Could see a touch of frost here by Monday morning too, but elsewhere temperatures holding up at 8 to 10 Celsius, so once again a pretty mild night for the time of year. As for Monday itself, the colder air across Scotland starts to make inroads further south, reaching northern England and parts of Northern Ireland through the day. Again, the showers turning increasingly wintry, particularly on the hills of Scotland, whereas across England and Wales, it's more a case of outbreaks of rain working their way in from the north at times, and staying quite mild here, with temperatures generally still close to double figures. Temperatures peaking then in the south at around about 9, 10, locally even 11 Celsius. 11 is 52 in Fahrenheit.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. For it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas when its mighty founder was a child himself. So says Ebenezer Scrooge's nephew Fred in Charles Dickens's 1843 novella A Christmas Carol. Dickens's book has been constantly loved and reimagined since it was first published. It's not just the spirit of Christmas that Charles Dickens captures so wonderfully, he's also a master of detail, from Mrs. Cratchit's plum pudding to the undigested bit of beef to the blot of mustard, the crumb of cheese and the fragment of underdone potato that Scrooge blames for his ghostly visitations. Joining me now is food historian and author of Christmas with Dickens, Pen Vogler. Pen, let's start with Christmas Carol. Did A Christmas Carol change Britain's view of Christmas?
I think it did, enormously. Before then, people were beginning to think, as they do now, that Christmas might be being a little bit commercial. It was too much food and drink, not enough kind of seriousness or not enough kind of love and family. And what Dickens did with A Christmas Carol was show people who were coming to the cities, who were kind of losing their history, their kind of agricultural, rural history, a new way of celebrating Christmas, that a real, just a family could get together and love and kind of get around the table together.
How interesting. Now, historically, people who'd lived in the country, as most folk did, they might typically receive some, if they were very ordinary folk, they might typically receive a gift from their employer, from their landlord at Christmas. Is that true?
Probably, yeah. So landlords and farmers who kind of might have had tenant farmers or labourers they might have exploited their workers the rest of the year, but traditionally at Christmas they would have made sure there was some kind of meat on the table. Meat was incredibly important to people's kind of sense of their self and sense of celebration. And of course, when people have to leave the countryside because they can't make those lives work any longer, they go into these new cities with all their factories and, kind of clerk jobs like Bob Cratchit's. And those links get broken. And I think one of the things Dickens is saying to his urban readers is, you have got to step in. You've got to take responsibility now because things have changed.
His urban readers being typically middle class.
Yes.
So they would have a bit of money and they might be able to help someone out at Christmas.
I think that's what he's saying. But also he's doing it, he's kind of hedging his bets in a way because he's showing a kind of Bob Cratchit's family. They're very nice, loving, hard-working. They're not scroungers and, he realises that his readers will sympathise with them, but they might also tiny bit see a little bit of Scrooge in themselves, a little bit of bar humbug, let people just look after themselves.
Let's talk about what's on the table. What do we learn from what's on the Cratchit's table?
So what's really interesting about that A Christmas Carol, which was published in 1843, it was a massive success. And what it seems to do is to anchor a couple of things to our kind of Christmas menu. And whereas before, a lot of those kind of Christmas dishes would have been seasonal, lots of people would have eaten them at different times of the year, Dickens does two things. He takes the goose, which is what the Cratchits are going to eat, and he turns it to a turkey, much bigger, meatier, kind of more generous. And then he takes this thing that he never calls Christmas pudding in A Christmas Carol. There's no Christmas pudding. He only calls it plum pudding, and he anchors it to that day. And interestingly, after then, people start publishing recipes for Christmas pudding, and it starts getting its name, Christmas pudding, from plum pudding. And I think all of that really comes from A Christmas Carol.
The turkey is not a bird that's indigenous to this country, is it? So it had to be introduced at some point. Do you know roughly when it was introduced?
I think probably about the 1510s, 1520s, comes from America. People think it comes from Turkey, which is why it gets its name.
Is that right?
Yes,
they think it comes from Turkey.
Yeah.
All right. And the turkey then begins to push aside what meats had been consumed before.
It really depends who you were.
Yes.
The most kind of aristocratic meat was probably venison or other kinds of game. It said something about your status, about your ability to go hunting or, have land. Middle classes would have had beef, maybe. And turkey was becoming very popular for the middle classes. And interestingly, goose, which is quite posh now, was then much more a working person's meat. And people in cities would have had goose clubs, like Christmas clubs. They pay in. And then, they might have paid a publican, for example, a couple of shillings a week, and then at the end of it, they get a nice plump goose.
Christmas pudding, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have any plum in it, or maybe I'm wrong on that, but was plum pudding more plummy than Christmas pudding?
So plum, it seems to mean just something sweet and delicious.
Right.
So all the raisins and the currants are plums.
Yes.
It's like the plum job.
In origin.
Yes.
And the plum pudding, then, you say, becomes a Christmas pudding almost immediately after A Christmas Carol is published?
Yes, I mean, it's occasionally called Christmas pudding before, but not often. And then a very famous for the time, the kind of Delia Smith of her day, lady called Eliza Acton, publishes a recipe called The Author's Christmas Pudding in 1845. And we know she's a big Dickens fan because she sent a copy of her cookbook to him.
And similar to what we're eating today, would you say, broadly?
Yes, I think very similar to what we're eating today, with the exception that in those days you probably had to take the stones out of the currants yourself on Christmas Eve. Big job.
Now, Christmas cake is quite different. Tell me about its movement.
Yes, interestingly, we seem to have sort of squashed our Christmas meal into kind of one day, so we have turkey, pudding and cake sometimes in one day. In Dickens' time, they would have had it on Twelfth Night, and it was a big celebration for him and for Victorians. It might have been decorated slightly differently, very elaborately, beautiful kind of pink or blue, white icing, lots of kind of stars and castles and things, and 12 cakes, as they were called, were fabulous. kind of gifts as well. So Dickens's oldest son was born on Twelfth Night, and his godmother every year gives him and the family a massive, beautiful gift of a 12th cake. And Twelfth Night sort of becomes less important, partly maybe because Victorians liked to squeeze their employees to work harder, and they wanted to kind of cut those holidays down. And also Queen Victoria really disapproved of it. She thought it was a bit too riotous, not very seemly. And so she had it kind of struck out of a kind of official list of holidays. And so all those things get squeezed into kind of 1 or 2 days.
And it's interesting because if you compare us with the continent, for instance, I go to Spain a lot.
Yeah.
A big celebration for them is Christmas Eve rather than Christmas Day. And I think that's quite typical in continental Europe. New Year's Day is quite an important day. And in Spain, 12th night, actually for them, the night of the 5th of January, is hugely important. That's the Children's Day.
Yeah.
So
it's a day of kind of play acting and charades and
that's what you're talking about, Dickens. And,
yes.
And he was rather good at that, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, yes. And he loved to kind of get all his friends and his family together and do the kind of whole kind of play things.
And then we have Germanic influences. You are sitting at the moment in front of 2 Christmas trees.
Yes.
And these are not Dickensian, they're Germanic, aren't they?
Yeah, so Queen Victoria also loved Christmas. Her husband, Prince Albert, did, and he brought some kind of traditions from Germany. Christmas tree is one of them, probably, and the Christmas card also is a German influence. And I think the first Christmas card sent by the royal family was the same year of A Christmas Carol.
And do we know what it showed? Did it show them?
I think it showed them being the happy family. And so that focus on the family comes from Dickens, but it also comes from the royal family.
We talked about A Christmas Carol. Of course, food occurs in other books as well. Tell me a little bit about the Pickwick Papers. And do we see a different side of Christmas in the Pickwick Papers?
Yeah, so Pickwick shows a sort of and also it comes in A Christmas Carol in when Scrooge is taken back to his past, is a much more sort of communal Christmas. A big family, a big hall, but also lots and lots of relatives all coming in, the servants, everybody sort of having a Christmas together. And in Pickwick, he makes a big thing about what they call wassail, which is a massive bowl of something. It's actually probably sort of mulled ale or maybe cider with apples on the top, and that's another old kind of rural tradition that we might have lost a little bit. But that idea of sharing a massive bowl of wassail or punch or something was a big part of old Christmas and everybody getting together. And so the Christmas Carol is interesting because it shows just a family and not like a whole community.
And do they eat anything different in the Pickwick Papers?
They eat masses in the Pickwick Papers. You don't see them eating much at Christmas. But interestingly, in a couple of other examples of Dickens, you do see an old-fashioned Christmas. In Great Expectations, you see a rural Christmas, and they have a leg of pickled pork, 2 fowls, and a pork pie. Well, I hope they have the pork pie, but actually, spoiler alert, one of the characters has given it away under duress.
Yes.
Quite famous scene.
Pip has given it away.
Pip has given it away, yes.
Marvellous. Well, thank you very much indeed, telling us about all that we owe to Dickens and to the Victorian traditions. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Vogler. During Advent, as we count down to Christmas Day, we're hearing from church ministers across the country. Each day, they have a special message for you to celebrate the festive season. Here's our first one.
The GB News Advent Calendar, Day 1.
Hi, I'm Chris Tufnell. I'm the vicar of Uterbridge Parish Church near Sheffield. On Christmas Day 1997, I opened a present. It was a book, and on the cover was a picture of a train, a boy with a scar on his head, and a sign saying platform 9 3/4. It was, of course, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the first in the major series. But I remember thinking, it'll never catch on. And so it stayed on my shelf gathering dust for years. People told me I should read it, but I didn't. Until I realized this Harry Potter thing was getting really quite big now. And so I opened the cover, began to read, and sure enough, I was soon hooked. I think it's all too easy for us to do the same with the story of the person Christmas is all about, Jesus Christ. It's clear his story has caught on, it's shaped the Western world and given us the values we cherish so much at Christmas. Most people have heard something about him. but few have actually read the story for themselves. If that's you, might it be time that you did? Happy Christmas.
You can see all of our special Advent messages as Christmas approaches by visiting gbnews.com/Advent. And we wish you all a very happy Christmas.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Donna Ida, who joins us now. And Donna, you look spectacular in your gorgeous denim jumpsuit.
Thank you.
And accessories. And it's important, isn't it, sometimes, just to keep things simple?
I always keep things simple. I travel a lot, I work long hours, and I don't want to think too much about what I'm wearing. So for me, one and done is perfect. Good accessories, fresh hair, nice makeup, and you can go anywhere, including GB News when you didn't know what was happening.
There we
Perfect.
go. Welcome.
Straight off the plane. Can we ask you some of our top denim questions?
Yes.
Because Stephen Dixon, the presenter of The Breakfast Show who's just on, said that double denim to him is an absolute no-go.
Oh, what does
Is that true?
Don't have him on again, darling.
OK. We're telling me fact.
I love double denim.
Really?
I love it. I think it is so cool.
Does it have to be different
I was going to say
tones?
double denim, same colour.
Or same
I
tones?
like the for me, I actually do like the same. Think Saint Laurent 70s. There's an amazing one that we're doing that's going to look great on you in the new season. The Joan Jean, we've got the City Slicker shirt. Oh, it's amazing. If it's done well, it's perfect. And I like it in a paler blue, but a good mid to dark. Very chic.
Yeah, you go.
No, well, I was just thinking, little old me, not quite sure
You'd look amazing
what to wear
in
this
it.
morning. How
was a
do
bit
guys
stressed.
pull off denim?
For me, if I was dressing you, I would have put you in a pair of jeans this morning with his amazing jumper, gorgeous watch.
Black, blue?
Black denim I do like. Men don't like it so much. Men like charcoal denim.
Oh, I don't like grey.
Charcoal. I love grey, and the best seller for men is charcoal denim.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Stefan Kyriazis back to the programme to take us through the West End's wonders. Welcome back to you, Stefan.
Thank you.
What have you been to see? We were just talking about A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and you've been to a show that's very much related.
Yes, 'tis the season, so lots of nutcrackers and lots of carolling. So we've got the wonderful one at the Old Vic, which is sumptuous and gorgeous, and every year there's a lovely one by Mark Gatiss up in Birmingham at the Rep at the moment. But this one is A Christmas Carol-ish. So it's a fun twist on it. It's very silly. It's very kind of spoofy. I roared with laughter all the way through, and much as I love the sound of my own voice, we've actually got the creator and star himself just in a little clip telling us all about the show and explaining it much better than I ever could. So we can take a little look at that first.
Christmas Carolish is effectively a comedic retelling of Dickens' classic A Christmas Carol, but it is slightly changed in the sense that rather than Scrooge, it's Santa who is sort of mean and stingy and not wanting to join in with all the kind of Christmas fun. But the other kind of slight sort of twist on it is that it's Mr. Swallow who is playing Santa, who is the analogy for Scrooge in this case, and Swallow has not really kind of that prepared for it, so he's sort of in and out of character all the time.
So this is Nick Mohammed. I know him from Ted Lasso, where he plays a very muted, kind of sensible character. Here, his alter ego, which I didn't know so much about, is Edinburgh Fringe comedy, Mr. Swallow, who is a ludicrous kind of Leeds performer who is putting on this production. And it literally opens, and there's only 4 people in it. Fantastic. They're all in gold sequins on roller skates doing an opening number telling you that they couldn't get the rights to Scrooge, so we've got Santa. And then we kick in with it. So he's Mr. Swallow playing Santa, and it's one of those ones that I love. It feels very improv-y. It stops all the time. There's lots of banter, lots of talking to the audience. I love silliness where, you know, there's the same guy playing all the ghosts, which Mr. Swallow's complaining about the whole time. Like, where's the budget? You're in the same costume. And he brings up this brilliant thing that the first one is Jacob Marley, who is a Christmas elf this time as a ghost. And Santa's there going, you've told me there's 3 ghosts coming, but aren't you a ghost? Doesn't that make 4 ghosts? And shouldn't the Christmas future ghosts still be alive? It's that kind of thing which I love. Just clever and silly. Brilliant numbers. The set, it's a bit like Six or Operation Mincemeat, where it's that sort of fringy improv thing that then has got a West End budget. So when the curtains pull back, we've got this gorgeous Santa's kind of stockroom, piled high with boxes and cases and everything, and they all open on doors and conveyor belts and different things, and it's complete riot, rollicking, lots of improv. All 4 of them are fantastic. Songs are brilliant, and also, which I love, sneaks in a little bit of heart here and there as well. But I just laughed all the way through, and it was refreshing and wonderful.
Who is the audience? How does it divide between children and adults?
The night I was there, it was pretty adult. I don't think there's anything too kind of racy or anything in it, but it feels quite grown up because of the humour. The humour is all its wit and sort of smart banter. And
it's not one of these things that has, as it were, 2 levels of humour for children and adults.
I'd say it's probably slightly more an adult one, but then kids will just laugh at all the silliness and the shows, and one of the guys dressed as a ridiculous reindeer. But Santa, as a little boy, did not want a reindeer. He wanted vouchers for Christmas, that sort of thing. So it's fun for everybody.
Where is it?
Soho Place, up on Tottenham Court Road. Beautiful new theatre, and it's running until the 31st of December. I thoroughly recommend it. I loved it, and just as something a little bit different from the usual.
OK, very, very good. What do you want to talk about next?
Something equally serious. It's importance of being earnest. And this is even more, this has been completely reworked. This is on at the National Theatre, so very grand and traditional. Max Webster, the director, done Life of Pi. He's done that very muted, fantastic Macbeth that's on at the moment with David Tennant. But he's had a go at the importance of being earnest. And the main star is Ncuti Gatwa, who is currently, everybody knows, as Doctor Who. And he previously had said what the West End and the National Theatre really needs is a pink, silly play. And we've got a little trailer here, which will tell you whether they've kind of got into that a bit. I think they...
Quite fantastic costuming for a start.
Yes. So what they've done is it's a little bit that kind of Bridgerton effect. So they've taken, in this case, Victoriana, but given it a little modern twist. It's like fondant, fancy colours, very over the top. And then what we have, just magnificently there, you got a little glimpse, Sharon D. Clarke, sensational. I know her from her kind of club days as a singer, 3 times Olivier Award winner as well. So she is coming in as Lady Bracknell, which we know from Edith Evans, Judi Dench. I kind of thought you might have a hat tucked behind there, Michael. I was waiting for you to do the line. But she does it with a Caribbean flavour, which is really interesting because you know those big matronly ladies that have got that kind of hauteur and the little sniffs and head tosses and that beautiful rolling accent. So she mangles words. So she completely reworks the kind of a handbag and does it in a completely different way. And it's been done a million times. So I absolutely love that. But she's very much the kind of steady galleon that sails through the middle of it all. And then around her, all the characters. It's very well known and well trodden by now that lots and lots of kind of queer, gay subtext to it. Ernest at the time was coded for homosexual, lots of other little references, and they really have brought it up. So Gatwa and then Hugh Skinner, who plays actually Ernest, are very camp and revelling in it and loving it. It opens with Gatwa in a red-pink dress, playing the piano supposedly, and then they go back to slightly more traditional costumes. But they certainly bring all of that up. And it's very interesting, I guess Wilde himself might have rejoiced that you have Sharon D. Clarke, Gatwa and Skinner that are all openly gay or queer and out, now playing these roles. And they really bring the kind of fun and silliness up of it. I think for me, they slightly over-egg it with the two girls. They sort of bring in a bit of sort of sapphic longing there as well. And I thought that just was a bit of a stretch too far. But then I was reading up, and George Bernard Shaw called this Wilde's most heartless play. And I think actually it is all very, very surface. There's a brilliant line in the play where it's in matters of great importance. It's appearances rather than substance that matter, style rather than substance. And so that's certainly true of this. It's just on the top surface, it is a romp, veering a little bit towards panto at times. Lots of physical comedy for a play that's very much about language. But belly laughs.
And remarkable at the National Theatre. And by the way, it was first performed just a few weeks before Wilde was tried and sent to prison.
1895, I think, yeah.
And lastly now, you've got Barcelona.
So Barcelona, I just wanted to bring up, it's been open for a while, and that is running until early January. And it's Lily Collins, daughter of Phil. And the other one is Alvaro Morte, who people will know Casa de Papel or Money Heist on Netflix.
He was the professor.
And it's just the two of them. And it literally opens with her staggering into the flat in a kind of spangly jumpsuit, absolutely drunk, mauling him pretty much drunkenly. And they're sort of making out and whatever. And then they sort of stop and start and stop and start. He's more mature. There's a flat and they're in a building that's about to be demolished. I won't spoil any of the twists. But slowly she appears like a ridiculous airhead American. He's a very cynical European. And Lily Collins can do this in her sleep. She did it with Emily in Paris. But I thought she just, little by little, it unpeels the layers, brings out some real humanity. The two of them together are fantastic. That one is on at the Duke of York's until January the 11th. We've got a little trailery thing just to give you a little bit of flavour of it.
It's a hugely compelling cast. It's just the two of them.
Yeah, it's the two of them.
What kind of stars are you giving this?
I gave it 4 stars. In my heart, it was 5, but it's a little bit flawed, and some of the twists at the end come in a little bit hard. But I thought the two of them were intensely believable, and it's almost played out in real time. So it's their conversations. It's kind of funny, then gets very serious, then gets ridiculous, then she's very drunk. But it's got beautiful pathos underneath it and a kind of sweet ending, which you don't expect once you find out the themes that are underneath everything. But I just thought the two of them, she's really at ease. That's her West End debut as well. And I thought it could be such a frothy, silly character. And she just layered in these little depths you kept getting little peeks of. He is magnificent. I would happily see him in anything. He's got presence, he's sexy, he's dry and witty, he absolutely commands the space, incredibly at ease. Obviously not his first language, but fluent, beautiful. I really enjoyed it. For me, this week, 3 great shows that I can recommend wholeheartedly on all levels.
How very, very lucky. Yeah, so a great show. I imagine it'd be quite hard to get a ticket for that.
It's been on for a little while, so I would say have a rummage around for that one, because I think there are tickets. The West End, there are so many shows on now, so I encourage people to look, and there's always offers as well. So please look for tickets.
Lovely to see you back, Stefan. Thank you very much indeed. That concludes the first hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. Please rejoin me at noon, when my panel will return to discuss whether Britain becomes a different sort of country once the state sanctions the killing of people who want to end their lives. We'll also be joined by the director of a gallery that is showcasing a new exhibition on Dora Carrington, and we'll reflect on 150 years since the birth of Winston Churchill. Please come back after the break.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So some sunny spells and blustery showers on the way for many of us today, but it is going to be turning colder as we head in towards the new working week. That's all thanks to this cold front that's sinking its way south and eastwards over the next few hours or so, bringing us northerly winds, particularly across the northern half of the UK into the start of Monday, but those spreading southwards through the rest of the week. Back to the rest of Sunday though. Plenty of showers around, particularly across western areas. These likely to turn heavy across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. But the further south and further east you are, there should be some sunshine as we head through the afternoon, and it will still be feeling mild for the time of year. Temperatures in the south perhaps around 15 or 16 degrees, and even across parts of Scotland we could see 12 or 13 degrees, so well above average for the time of year. Through the rest of Sunday evening, those showers do continue. This band of showers across parts of Scotland could turn particularly heavy as we go through into this evening, and there'll be plenty of showers pushing in across northern and western areas into this evening as well. Across Northern Ireland, a pretty similar picture, plenty of showers in the west, but staying a little bit drier for a time further east. Across parts of Wales, southwest England, those blustery showers pushing up on that southwesterly breeze, but eastern parts of England perhaps just staying that little bit drier in towards this evening. Overnight, those showers continue to push their way eastwards, so almost anywhere seeing a bit of wet weather into the early hours of Monday morning. But across parts of Scotland, we'll see those showers starting to turn increasingly to sleet and snow, particularly over any high ground as we go into the start of Monday. And it'll be a chillier night for most of us, perhaps some frost across parts of Scotland, and even further south, temperatures dropping to around 6 or 7 degrees quite widely. Into the start of Monday morning, this band of showers pushes its way southwards across the country, but the further west you are, there should be plenty of sunny spells as we head towards the afternoon, but those sleet and snow showers do continue across the northern parts of Scotland, so that should lead to us feeling a little bit chillier than we've seen recently. Those northerly winds bringing us cooler temperatures around 10 or 11 in the south and around 4 or 5 in the north.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest, greatest Great British giveaway so far, with your chance to win a spectacular £50,000 in tax-free cash. 2025 could be amazing, with plenty of treats, holidays and fun on the horizon. How would you enjoy that cash? £50,000 will make someone our biggest ever winner. For your chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I wish you a very good afternoon. American writer Washington Irving described Christmas time as the season for kindling the fire of hospitality in the hall and the genial flame of charity in the heart. In that spirit, dear viewers, I offer you a warm welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo for discussion of ethics, culture and food. The House of Commons has voted to allow doctors to assist patients who are thought to be terminally ill to die. Is that a very big step? Have we not until now assumed that life was sacrosanct and that the state would come down heavily against those who ended the life of another? Do we become a different country when the state agrees with the proposition that some lives aren't worth living and provides the means to end them? My panel will return to the studio to debate that ethical question. Pallant House Gallery in Sussex has opened a new exhibition on artist Dora Carrington. She was a member of the Bloomsbury Group and had a very long passion for the writer Lytton Strachey. I'll hear about her life, love, marriage and painting from the director of the gallery, Simon Martin. Yesterday was the 150th anniversary of the birth of Sir Winston Churchill, labelled by many our greatest Briton. Historian Oliver Webb Carter will be here to talk about the man behind the politician and his legacy. And in the latest instalment of my Taste of Britain series, Hannah Harley-Young will be with me to share some ideas for Christmas canapes. From salmon blinis to pigs in blankets, we will review what's best for the season. Before all of that, your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you. The top stories. Well, some MPs who backed the assisted dying bill have indicated they could consider changing their minds along the process amid concerns over palliative care and provision and safeguarding. MPs will be able to suggest amendments to that legislation when it moves into its next parliamentary step, the committee stage. Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, told GB News there's still a long way to go.
Now that Parliament's voted on that on Friday, it will go into committee. It will be considered in much more detail now, like every other piece of legislation, and it should be because it's such a serious issue. And the House of Commons will have to vote on it again in a few months' time. So this bill, this big and serious measure, will be properly and fully considered clause by clause now, as it should be. And even though we had to vote on Friday, I still think there's probably a long way to go before this becomes law.
Well, Pat McFadden also suggested that questions over costs of assisted dying plans could be among the things discussed in the next stage of the process. Shadow Environment Secretary Victoria Atkins, who voted in favour, says it's a good idea to be having this conversation.
We saw across the House, from both those who voted aye, but also those who voted no, there was, for example, a real wish to see conversations about palliative care and the quality of palliative care continue. I think we also saw many heartbreaking examples And there'll be, viewers at home that have been personally affected by this, where they just want to see whether the law can get into a better place than it is at the moment.
In other news, the Prime Minister says a new phase for his government will begin this week under what he calls a plan for change for Britain. Sir Keir Starmer is set to announce he'll reform the public sector and overhaul Whitehall when he makes a major speech marking the next phase of government. The Prime Minister will announce the markers for his so-called missions that Number 10 says will allow the public to hold Sir Keir and his team to account on their manifesto promises. It's been suggested these moves will influence decisions for next year's spending review. Greg Wallace has responded to mounting allegations against him in a defiant video posted online, saying the accusations come from middle-class women of a certain age. Wallace, who stepped back from presenting the BBC cooking show MasterChef after accusations he made sexual comments towards staff and celebrity guests on a range of programmes over 17 years, says he worked with more than 4,000 contestants over the years of all different ages, backgrounds and walks of life. Well, the BBC is now facing fresh questions over its handling of allegations against him after emails emerged showing it was warned about him in 2017. According to the Sunday Times, the broadcaster Asma Mir complained about inappropriate comments he'd allegedly made during filming of the Celebrity MasterChef. Wallace's lawyers strongly deny he engaged in sexually harassing behaviour, while the BBC says it will always listen if people want to make them aware of something directly.
In the newspaper, I can see the complaints coming from a handful of middle-class women of a certain age just from Celebrity MasterChef.
And the Princess of Wales has delivered her first Christmas message in the form of a letter ahead of her annual carol service. In that message to those planning to attend the service next week, she says love is the greatest gift people can give each other. This appearance will be Princess Catherine's most prominent return to royal engagements since undergoing preventative chemotherapy. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
Thank you, Tatiana Sanchez. That human life is sacrosanct is a principle which has underlain our democracy. The state has been there to punish severely those who take the life of another or even connive with suicide. Even doctors who hasten the end of life can be prosecuted. Those who argue to end the death penalty often asserted that the state had no right or authority to end life. Are those principles upended by the House of Commons' decision to give a second reading to the bill for assisted death? I'm rejoined by my panel, political commentator Stella Sanchez-Guido, former MEP and columnist Patrick O'Flynn, and broadcaster and journalist Candice Holdsworth. Candice, Pat McFadden there on the news was saying that this is a big and serious measure. I would say that's almost an understatement. Do you have the feeling that something quite important is happening here?
I do. I think so. I think that this is a massive moment. I mean, I think that was demonstrated by the very emotional debate in the House of Commons, because I think that it's so true the way that you have framed this. People see this as a complete fundamental change in the way that we view the role of the state in terms of people's choice over their death. Now, the people who brought forward this bill would say it's very narrowly defined, it's just for people who are very ill, it's actually giving them autonomy, it's not about the states having control, actually it's giving individual people the ability to end their life. I'm not convinced by that. I think it absolutely does open the door, as we have seen in countries like Canada, for the state to start saying, well, what are the benefits, for instance, of having a policy like MAID? It could be a cost-saving measure, for instance. You know, we don't have to invest in lots of end-of-life care. And then you sort of get those arguments being made. And so that is a complete fundamental shift. And we get into looking at whether lives are worth living or not worth living, whether we spend on those lives or whether we don't spend on those lives.
I don't want to make too much of the comparison with the death penalty because you can't follow it too far. But it does strike me that, people who in one instance would say the state has no authority, the state simply doesn't have the right to get involved in taking human life, in the case of the death penalty, the same sort of people might now be saying, oh, but the state not only has a right, it actually has a duty to facilitate this. Now, I know that under the proposals that are being made, people will be invited to kill themselves so they're not being killed by another person, but the tablet is being put in front of them by somebody who works for, let's say, the National Health Service, or they're being asked to nod or blink or whatever in order to set off a lethal injection. So it's jolly close to the state taking your life.
Oh yes, and I mean, I think, you know, that for me, there's just inadequate safeguarding provisions. I mean, I know it has to be, the decision has to be approved by a High Court judge, but that could end up becoming just a rubber stamp. I mean, you have no idea of how they will consider this matter. And, you know, you can find situations in which, as has happened in Canada, people are in dire socioeconomic circumstances, and they are offered this as a way to resolve their situation, which is shocking. And it seems like, you know, that's just a scare story, but it is actually what has happened. I mean, we actually have proof that this has happened. Also, we have, you know, things like coercive control are not well understood. We do not understand it. And I think some people may not even have insight into their own behaviour when they're acting coercively in a care situation.
Stella, you were born and brought up in a different country, and I mention that only because I think from country to country, the idea of the role of the individual and the role of the state varies a lot. It does between my two nationalities, between Spain and Britain. The role of the state in one is considered very different from the other. But how do you feel about the role that the state is being invited to play now in Britain in this particular matter?
In different to what it would be like in Greece, I have definitely been surprised at how quickly this has gone through. I know there has been a conversation about assisted dying in Parliament before, but it is quite strange that the state would be allowed so quickly to get that power. Of course, the bill hasn't passed yet, and surprisingly, at committee stage, they will be accepting evidence, which is not something that's normally done, let alone for a private member's bill. But it does show, I think what worries me about this, and what is quite foreign to me as a person who comes from Greece, is how in Greece we would consider it that you may be at a stage where you would want to have assisted dying, but your family or your community would not let you. And that is because they would know that sometimes inside the mind of someone who is feeling like a burden, someone who is old, someone who is ill, someone who has to depend on other people and who is quite vulnerable, and we recognize that this is what's going through some people's minds. And a more community-focused, perhaps, point of view would be to not let someone take that decision, because we still want to have them with us for as long as possible.
You're implying that in Greece the extended family would wrap around?
Absolutely. For me personally, I know that my mother at various times has said that she would like to have that kind of option because she would not like to see me become a carer. And for me personally, I'm just thinking, no, forget it. I'm not going to let you.
Patrick.
Well, I've got a bit of a consensus here because I'm also troubled by the bill and was against it. And for me, one of the big things was this 6-month time period by which if doctors had assessed you had 6 months or less than that to live, you would move into the category of being able to kind of opt for this. Well, I was reading several cases yesterday, including one from a Labour Party account purporting to talk about Dr. Mo Molam, who you may remember tragically died of a brain tumour many years ago, and saying that at one point she was told she had 6 months to live and lived a largely good and interesting life for another 8 years, right? So 6 months seems to me a dangerously long period. It's not the really last miserable segment of life we're talking to. And the other thing I worry about is we have a brilliant campaigner such as Dame Esther Ranson, who throughout her life has had a magnificent life. She's used to having agency, changing the way we do things, and she's sort of become the cause célèbre for this. Now, are we elevating the right, the extreme personal liberalism here, the right for someone like Dame Esther, wonderful woman that she is, to have agency, to have complete agency over when she passes, at the expense of a lot of people with less agency, much more vulnerable, much more under the cosh? I mean, our social care system is set up to basically ebb away what might be regarded by the next generation as family money, because there's no ceiling on the amount of money that's spent. People, therefore, you can see people being put under pressure by families.
Could you come to the point of our relationship to the state? I mean, to me, it's somewhat paradoxical that at a time when most of us have given up on the state, you know, it can't run railways or health services or military forces or anything, at the very time when we've more or less given up on the state, we're entrusting it in this enormous way. Does that strike you as paradoxical?
It strikes me as worrying and alarming. Do I think the NHS is set up to handle this well? No, I don't. Then there's also the question, is there an imbalance where the resources of the state is leaning towards an off you pop, and then the staying alive element is the underfunded hospice movement maybe, or less fashionable religious perspectives? And is there going to be an inbuilt bias in the system towards people ending their life before they need to do so, and it might not be in their best interests at all? So I thought Pat McFadden sounded a slightly worried man, thinking, let's rein this back and take a careful look at it, and I'm glad.
Very briefly, Candice, we're running out of time. Pat McFadden was exactly making the point that it's got to go through committee. Do you think that there might be a change? Do you think it's done and dusted, or do you think it's still going to be debated and might end up somewhere different?
It may end up somewhere different. I mean, I don't think that it was an overwhelming victory, and I think that there are a lot of people who are deeply alarmed by this. And I mean, I think if it does go through, so I'm talking purely theoretically now, if it goes through, you know, we have assisted dying in this country. I think the first nightmare story that comes out, like some of the stories out of Canada or the Netherlands, you could start to see a big opposition against it, and it could even be a political campaigning tool.
Although, Stella, what I rather worry about is that it will develop its own industry and its own lobby group.
That's the problem, the economic interest, which is why a lot of people freak out about all of the advertisements on the tube. Who is paying all of this money? What are the economic industries? What are the economic interests and the new professions that are coming out of this?
Most interesting. I'll just say to viewers that actually I chose this topic without knowing the views of any of my panel. So it might easily have been that all three of my panellists took a completely different view. So the fact we've all been on the same side of the question is kind of slightly unfortunate, but it was entirely arbitrary. It wasn't fixed. Anyway, Stella Zadchik-Keithu, Patrick O'Flynn and Candice Holdsworth, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, a new exhibition on Dora Carrington has just opened at Pallant House Gallery in Sussex. I'll be joined by the gallery's director to learn about this fascinating character and her intimate links to the Bloomsbury Group. This is Sunday with Mike Portillo, only on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
The row over Prince Harry's US visa will be brought back into focus.
Earlier this year, Nigel Farage asked Donald Trump about this very issue. Let's take a listen.
No one knows the truth. What did he put on his American visa form?
If they know something about the drugs and if he lied, they'll have to take appropriate action.
Appropriate action? What could that mean?
Well, the fractured relationship between the president-elect and the royal couple, or ex-royal couple, I should say, began in 2020 when the Sussexes urged American voters to stay clear of Trump, urging them to reject hate speech, misinformation and online negativity.
OK, well, to break down this story for us, we're joined by royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, so what are the chances of Trump saying, you know what, Harry, time to get out of here?
I very strongly suspect that the new administration has other priorities, and also it wouldn't want the enormous amount of fuss. Can you just imagine it in hypothetical situations if it happened? I mean, we've seen Nigel Farage there get an answer from Donald Trump, which implied that this might be looked into, and it might.
The Americans say that if you have taken illegal drugs, you're not allowed immigration status. Prince Harry, in his book, said he'd taken illegal drugs, and there he is with American immigration status. I mean, how do the two things make sense? Either he lied in the book, or he lied to the US government.
I can't see that the future administration would want to be involved with problems with the British royal family, which obviously would occur if this happened.
Yeah, that's true. Richard Fitzwilliams, thank you very much, as ever.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Even if the name Dora Carrington is not familiar to you, those of her closest acquaintances probably are. For example, Virginia Woolf, E.M. Forster and Lytton Strachey. You may also know one of Carrington's paintings, Farm at Wattenglass, a landscape of a rural Cumbrian barn. It was voted the nation's second favourite artwork in 2014, beaten only by a David Hockney portrait of his parents. A new exhibition of Carrington's paintings has just opened at Pallant House Gallery in Sussex, located a stone's throw from Charleston Farmhouse, a hub where the Bloomsbury artists often gathered. The gallery champions female artists and hopes to inspire the next generation with Carrington's remarkable work. The director of Pallant House Gallery, Simon Martin, joins me now. Simon, lovely to see you here. So, Dora Carrington is not known to lots of people, and very few pieces are in public collections. So you have had a great deal of work to do to put this exhibition together.
Absolutely. It's been, next year, it will be 30 years since the last major exhibition of Carrington's work, which happened in 1995 at the Barbican Gallery. And I guess if people know Carrington's work, they might have seen the film that took place that year, that came out that year, starring Emma Thompson as Carrington and Jonathan Pryce as Lytton Strachey, who was her main kind of key relationship in her life. And that, in a way, dramatised a lot of those relationships. And so people will often know her life as much as her art. There's only 16 works in public collections. And so apart from chances such as the big billboard campaign you mentioned 10 years ago, there have been very few chances to actually see her work in the flesh. And so what this exhibition does is bring together around 80 works by Carrington and a few of her key contemporaries, providing a new generation really a chance to see and enjoy her work.
Well, you might explain that we're talking about her as Carrington because that was her own choice.
Absolutely.
She dropped the Dora.
Yes, Carrington said that she wanted to reject what she called the Victorian sentimentality of Dora. And when she went to the Slade School of Art, which was one of the leading schools of art in the early 20th century, she also cropped off her long hair. And she was one of a group of women that Virginia Woolf termed the cropheads. And it was very much kind of, she saw herself as a kind of new woman, a very kind of confident kind of styling of her own identity, really. And part of that was rejecting the name Dora.
And to talk about some of the complications of her life, she fell for Lytton Strachey. Lytton Strachey was gay. There was no... I don't think there was any chance for a physical relationship between them, but they moved in together. She then married Partridge, renamed by Strachey Ralph Partridge. That wasn't his name originally. So she marries Ralph Partridge. Lytton Strachey fancies Ralph Partridge, and Dora goes on to have affairs with other men. And Carrington then also takes her own life after Lytton Strachey has died. Dear, oh dear, what a life.
Yes, I mean, it's often said about the Bloomsbury Group, of course, that they lived in squares and loved in triangles, and Carrington is really an extraordinary example of that, and she said that there were a great deal of a great many kinds of love, and so actually she managed, when you read her letters, and she wrote about 2,000 letters between about 1912 and her death, these letters are full of wit, and an extraordinary kind of sense of living in a way. But it was, as you say, it was a very complicated life. She she was really kind of like a moth, a kind of a flame to various moths. I mean, Mark Gertler, the painter, was in love with her at the Slade and had a rather kind of frustrated kind of romance with her. And there are many of these. She attracted many people around her, and actually she also created these extraordinary homes, which many of the Bloomsbury group, of course, would paint the interiors. They'd paint the kind of furniture, and, as well as actually artworks to go on the walls. And at the homes that she had with Lytton Strachey at Tidmarsh Mill and then at Ham Spray, she created these wonderful interiors.
And some people have argued that she put too much energy into homemaking and not enough into painting. We haven't really talked about her painting yet. What opinion have you formed of her as a painter, of her merits, her qualities, her talent?
I mean, what's absolutely clear is that she was one of the most remarkable of her generation at the Slade School of Art. She won several prizes for her drawing and her draftsmanship. And in the first room of the exhibition, we have some of the work, for example, a couple of female nudes that she painted when she was at the Slade, and they really are kind of quite outstanding. And indeed, the drawing that she did of one of her brothers, Noel Carrington, who went on to found Puffin Books, very famous publishers in the mid-20th century, is an absolutely exquisite drawing. When she was at her best, I mean, she's quite remarkable. And as you say, the farm at Wattonlath that she painted in 1921 is one of the most popular paintings in Britain, although people don't know her wider work. I think where it's more...
Is that in your exhibition, by the way?
It is, yes, and we've borrowed that from the Tate Gallery. And where I think it's more complicated is that some of the works that she did were, for example, what were known as tinsel paintings in the late 20s, and she would paint on the back of sheets of glass and then use foil. It kind of relates to Victorian folk art in Britain, and these would be sold at places like Fortnum and Mason's or given to friends. And she didn't see these as great artworks, but they were very much part of that sense in the mid-20th century of artists trying to connect back to the naive qualities of British folk art. So, in a way, trying to judge her finest portraits, for example, her portraits of the writer E.M. Forster or her portrait of Lytton Strachey reading, against some of the more decorative things. I mean, they're quite different forms of creativity in a way.
Those two portraits are, in my mind, are they in your exhibition?
They are, yes. And the portrait of Lytton Strachey comes from the National Portrait Gallery, Astor's, in fact, the E.M. Forster portrait. And in a way, they're two of the finest portraits of Bloomsbury writers, in a way, and because she sits between that artistic and literary world of the 1920s and created some of the most remarkable. I mean, Lytton Strachey sits there. He had incredibly long fingers and a very long beard, and he sits there reading. And it's a scene that, of course, they recreated in the film with Jonathan Pryce as Lytton Strachey.
Because on their first meeting, Lytton Strachey tried to kiss her, oddly enough, and she thought that her revenge would be to go into his bedroom while he was asleep and cut his beard off, and he opened his eyes before that act could be committed, and that's how their intense relationship began. An extraordinary story.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Full of colour. She had an affair with Gerald Brennan, a name that means something to me because he went off to Spain and wrote most interestingly about Spain, and she paints southern Spain. And one of the things that's been said is that in her landscapes, she's sometimes painting the human body as well as the landscape. Is that something that occurred to you? Can you stand up that?
Yes, I mean, one of her most famous paintings we have of Spain has. It's very much like you could liken it to the female form. You know, the kind of the
delicately put.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, sometimes, of course, there's another painter called Leonora Carrington, who was the partner of Max Ernst, and was a surrealist artist and has become very famous in recent years. And at times, Dora Carrington, you know, is almost surreal in her landscapes as well. And that does sometimes lead to some confusion between the two artists. But, I mean, they're quite different and not related in any way.
So what's been the experience of curating this for you? What have you learnt?
Well, I mean, I'm the director of the museum, so actually we have a wonderful curatorial team at the gallery, and we've actually had... The exhibition has been curated by Anne Chisholm, who edited the letters, and Ariane Banks. And so we've worked very closely with two experts on locating and finding those works. I think when you have an exhibition such as this, where, of course, there hasn't been, for 3 decades, there hasn't been an exhibition, finding the works is the key challenge. And so we work through, researching what has come up at auction, finding members of families, and often, of course, things have passed through several hands since the previous exhibition. So there's a lot of detective work that the team has to do. And it's, it's wonderful when you can trace lost works and bring them back to the public. And I think that's a key part of our remit, is actually trying to provide a new perspective on less familiar parts of modern British art.
What you say about that detective work is a real insight into what curators do. Would you like to hold up the book there?
Yes.
Is this the catalogue?
So this is the book that has been published. So every exhibition that we do, we publish a major exhibition. Ali Smith, the novelist, has written the foreword for this because she's a huge fan of Carrington's work, and it also features several newly researched essays by a number of different academics.
Absolutely magnificent. Well, I hope you have a most successful exhibition at the Pallant Gallery.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon Martin. Coming up, yesterday was the 150th anniversary of Sir Winston Churchill's birth. I'll be joined by the historian Oliver Webb Carter to talk about the man, the politician and the legacy. But before that, your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you. The top story. Some MPs who backed the assisted dying bill have indicated they could consider changing their mind along the process amid concerns over palliative care provision and safeguarding. MPs will be able to suggest amendments to the legislation when it moves into its next parliamentary step, the committee stage. Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, told GB News there's still a long way to go.
Now that Parliament's voted on that on Friday, it will go into committee. It will be considered in much more detail now, like every other piece of legislation, and it should be because it's such a serious issue. And the House of Commons will have to vote on it again in a few months' time. So this bill, this big and serious measure, will be properly and fully considered clause by clause now, as it should be. And even though we had to vote on Friday, I still think there's probably a long way to go before this becomes law.
The Prime Minister says a new phase for his government will begin this week under what he calls a plan for change for Britain. Sir Keir Starmer is set to announce he'll reform the public sector and overhaul Whitehall when he makes a major speech marking the next phase of government. The Prime Minister will announce the markers for his so-called missions that Number 10 says will allow the public to hold Sir Keir and his team to account on their manifesto promises. It's been suggested these moves will influence decisions for next year's spending review. And Greg Wallace has responded to the mounting allegations against him in a defiant video posted online saying the accusations come from middle-class women of a certain age. Wallace, who stepped back from presenting the BBC cooking show MasterChef after accusations he made sexual comments towards staff and celebrity guests on a range of programmes over 17 years, says he worked with more than 4,000 contestants over the years of all different ages, backgrounds and walks of life. Well, now television presenter Kirsty Allsop has accused Mr Wallace of making inappropriate comments to her when they worked together. Posting on X, she said within 1 hour of meeting him, he told me of a sex act that he and his partner at the time enjoyed. She goes on to say that it was totally unprofessional. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So some sunny spells and blustery showers on the way for many of us today, but it is going to be turning colder as we head in towards the new working week. That's all thanks to this cold front that's sinking its way south and eastwards over the next few hours or so, bringing us northerly winds, particularly across the northern half of the UK into the start of Monday, but those spreading southwards through the rest of the week. Back to the rest of Sunday though. Plenty of showers around, particularly across western areas. These likely to turn heavy across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. But the further south and further east you are, there should be some sunshine as we head through the afternoon, and it will still be feeling mild for the time of year. Temperatures in the south perhaps around 15 or 16 degrees, and even across parts of Scotland we could see 12 or 13 degrees, so well above average for the time of year. Through the rest of Sunday evening, those showers do continue. This band of showers across parts of Scotland could turn particularly heavy as we go through into this evening, and there'll be plenty of showers pushing in across northern and western areas into this evening as well. Across Northern Ireland, a pretty similar picture, plenty of showers in the west, but staying a little bit drier for a time further east. Across parts of Wales, southwest England, those blustery showers pushing up on that southwesterly breeze, but eastern parts of England perhaps just staying that little bit drier in towards this evening. Overnight, those showers continue to push their way eastwards, so almost anywhere seeing a bit of wet weather into the early hours of Monday morning. But across parts of Scotland, we'll see those showers starting to turn increasingly to sleet and snow, particularly over any high ground as we go into the start of Monday. And it'll be a chillier night for most of us, perhaps some frost across parts of Scotland, and even further south, temperatures dropping to around 6 or 7 degrees quite widely. Into the start of Monday morning, this band of showers pushes its way southwards across the country, but the further west you are, there should be plenty of sunny spells as we head towards the afternoon, but those sleet and snow showers do continue across the northern parts of Scotland, so that should lead to us feeling a little bit chillier than we've seen recently. Those northerly winds bringing us cooler temperatures around 10 or 11 in the south and around 4 or 5 in the north.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Yesterday was the 150th anniversary of the birth of Sir Winston Churchill. Born into aristocracy at Blenheim Palace in 1874, Churchill spent his early years travelling the world as a journalist and as a soldier in the Royal Cavalry. Churchill is remembered for his leadership as Prime Minister during the Second World War. Inspiring speeches, brave leadership and victory cemented Sir Winston's place in history. Historian Oliver Webb-Carter joins me now to talk about the man and his legacy. Hello, Oliver. Let's talk about the young Winston. There was a movie of that name, maybe 40 or odd years ago. He was an extraordinarily brave and impetuous young man, wasn't he?
Yes, he almost from the very start. I mean, he was difficult to pin down, I think, throughout his young life, to categorise. He hated school, and he didn't go to university, for example, unlike many of his peers in politics. He then was desperate to make a name for himself. I think there's a sense throughout his young life, well, throughout his life, in fact, that he was always desperate to make a mark. He felt that sense of destiny. I mean, he
in particular to be a hero.
Indeed. And he took part in five separate conflicts. Of course, the Boer War, most famously from that film in Young Winston. That's a key part. But also the Great War. After leaving the cabinet, he then fought in the trenches. So, I mean, you can't imagine a politician like that today. You just can't.
No. He makes his name in South Africa, partly because he's very brave and partly, of course, part of the bravery, he escapes and he gets back to Britain, and that gives him a great launch to fight an election, I think a by-election, if I recall. And he gets himself into Parliament for the first time.
Yes, Greater Manchester, I think, is the seat. He was he joined the joined the Tory party, but then crossed the floor to the Liberals. I think there's an individualistic element to Churchill that I think he was a bit suspicious or unwilling to be placed in a particular. He wasn't, I don't think, particularly clubbable. He wouldn't like the strictures of a certain political party. So I think he didn't have a problem with crossing the floor twice.
No. Although many people distrust him, of course, because he had crossed the floor.
Indeed. In fact, when he returned to Harrow School, where he was educated, didn't enjoy, he was actually booed by the boys for crossing the floor. I mean, I also was at Harrow, and he's a great hero now, so that certainly wouldn't be happening today.
And he had this very productive partnership with David Lloyd George in social reform. I mean, many people now perhaps would not realise what an important social reformer Churchill was. This is the period of the introduction of old age pensions and labour exchanges, and Lloyd George's budget, which was frankly redistributive, at least by the mark of the time. Churchill continued to be impetuous. I think of him going armed as Home Secretary to the siege of Sydney Street, I think in 1911. Of course, his contribution to the troubles of Ireland is to send gunships to Belfast. And I was very struck. There's a book called The Strange Death of Liberal England by George Dangerfield, which is about the collapse of the Liberal Party. It was written in the 1920s. And Dangerfield sees Churchill at that time as a kind of joke figure, this man who's always sort of rushing to the barricades, always got the most extreme solution to every problem. Difficult now to remember that, since we, of course, recall him now as the leader in the Second World War.
Yes, he came to 1940 with a lot of baggage. I mean, that impetuosity that Sydney Street, I mean, that was a mistake. I think we could all accept that. That's, you don't want your Home Secretaries intervening. I can't imagine the current Home Secretary participating.
During the Irish Civil War, I found out he was making a documentary. He seriously proposed bombing the rebels in the Four Courts in Dublin using RAF aircraft, which would be disguised as Irish government aircraft. He was going to bomb the Four Courts from the air.
Well, during the Second World War, he contemplated invading the Republic. So, luckily, Ireland was a problem for Churchill, actually, and he wrote about how much of an influence it had on British and English politics, as it has, you know, since the Act of Union. But he also sent in the Black and Tans, which I think is another mistake of his. I mean, so he wasn't perfect, you know, much as it pains me to say it, he was not perfect. But he had that, I think you introduced him as an aristocrat, which of course he was, but he had that kind of sense of noblesse oblige, I think, that he had a sort of paternalistic approach to which is, I think, why he was an enthusiastic ally of Lloyd George in those reforms.
Some of the most recent movies made about the Second World War seem to place him as an ageing Prime Minister who's obviously present and is making the speeches, which are very important, but the war is basically run by the military who know how to run a war. Is that the way you view it?
Well, he had learned a lot, I think, from the First World War and the catastrophe of the Gallipoli campaign, where he had overruled chiefs of staff. And I think in the Second World War he was more open to argument than the younger Churchill. But I don't think it can be understated how significant his role was in 1940. If Lord Halifax had become Prime Minister, which was quite possible, and talks with Hitler had been concluded, which again was quite possible. Hitler was offering, at the time, considered fairly reasonable terms. Then it's likely both houses of Parliament would approve, and then we would have peace with Nazi Germany. And it took Churchill, it took a man like Churchill to persuade the country that we had to fight on.
The last topic I want to raise with you is we are rather obsessed by the Second World War in Britain, and I believe the reason for that is that whereas all our European neighbours, with the exception of Ireland, fell under either fascism or communism during that period, we did not. and therefore we don't have anything to apologise about. We fought fascism, we fought Nazism, and we brought them both down. So for people who have a different agenda, who want Britain to feel ashamed of its past, it's now quite important to debunk Churchill. It's quite important to accuse him of creating the Indian famine and of being a racist and so on. Do you get that feeling?
I do. I think it's ahistorical. The famine was caused by a natural disaster and failures in local administration. Also, Burma, a sort of a breadbasket for that part of India, was under Japanese occupation at the time. He's just not responsible for the Bengal famine. And there's plenty of mud one can throw at Churchill. As I said before, he's not perfect. But the Bengal famine isn't one of them. He gets accused of being racist. You have to remember, he was a man of his time. He was born in the Victorian era. He had a view that the British Empire was supreme, and he was an unashamed imperialist. So, as a historian, I get I don't like it when we judge people by the present. He said things that wouldn't be acceptable today.
Yeah.
But
and that's a trap that we are led into again and again. Oliver Webb-Carter, you commented off-air that not many people have noted this anniversary, so I'm very pleased that you've come in to note it so thoroughly. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Coming up, it's the season for festive parties and gatherings. Hannah Harley-Young will be here to share some classic Christmas canapes. This is Mike Portillo on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Does it make you all nostalgic? Do you miss the jungle looking at that?
I do, actually. I mean, it was one of the highlights of my career. I really enjoyed it because I'm like a little boy. I love being outdoors and taking the mick and arguing, and I love all that, so that's what it's all about. It's so much emotional stuff because food plays so much a part in being in the jungle, and it really gets your sort of mental bits going, I would love to go back. I mean, maybe there's a show called Geriatrics in the Jungle. I think that might be a good one.
And did you ever have to shout those immortal words, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here?
No, I didn't. I think Daniela Westbrook was the only one who bottled out. Most of us stuck it to the end, well, as far to the end as we could get. We had something called the Terrible Trio. It was me, Phil Tufnell, and Linda Barker, and we were the late night drinkers and smokers in those days. We just took the mick out of everything, really.
And I was just saying before we came to you, Anthony, there's something a bit perverse about how we all enjoy, my kids as well, absolute hysterics at some people's clear distress. I mean, on the opening show, this guy, Dean, who we're watching now, they were having to eat, I don't want to use the word at this hour of the morning, but part of a male anatomy combined with some eyeballs mushed up into a smoothie. Yeah. And he was drinking it. He said, my IBS! My IBS! And we were just laughing.
Play havoc with
It's so weird, isn't it, that we find that so funny?
I'm looking at the two Barrys, Barry McGuigan and GK Barry as my sort of favourites, if you want.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Now that we're in December, attention turns to the festive parties that will be celebrated in homes, bars and offices across the country. The Christmas canapé offers partygoers a small treat that staves off hunger and soaks up the fizz. Founder and host of Crazy Sexy Food, Hannah Harley-Young, joins me now with a toothsome selection. Lovely to see you, Hannah.
You too.
Origin of the word canapé?
Yes, French. Sort of from the, of course, from sort of the 1800s. It means sofa. So it's sort of playing on the analogy of someone sitting or lying on a sofa. It is about the garnish, traditionally sitting on a piece of stale bread or pastry. Obviously, it's evolved over the years. I don't have any stale bread for you, don't worry. But the idea is that it's something sort of garnish, something exciting sitting on a vehicle that you can put in your mouth in 1 or 2 bites.
That's interesting. Do you know what the origin of tapa is, the Spanish thing?
Tell me.
Well, a tapa, tapar in Spanish is to cover. And a tapa sat on a little plate that was just enough to cover your glass.
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
And that was important because you might otherwise get a fly in your wine or whatever.
We don't want that.
And indeed, it may have helped to keep the wine cool as well.
Absolutely.
So the idea is there in both of them that these are sort of linear things.
Absolutely. But I think what's so lovely about, I mean, I'm obsessed with canapés and I judge a party by the quality of a canapé. I have been known to keep myself closer to the kitchen doors when they are coming out so that I can get first dibs. And I think what I found really interesting, actually, kind of preparing this for you today, is the evolution of the canapé. I've brought a couple that are very traditional. Of course, your smoked salmon, blinis with some sour cream, a little bit of cracked black pepper. Now, this is, who doesn't love a smoked salmon blini?
I absolutely love it.
Cheers.
You won't be able to answer my next question. I'll probably have to filibuster for a little bit. I'm just wondering how far back in time this goes. I mean, it's obviously post-war. What is it? Is it 60s or 70s? How long have we been eating these things?
I would say around about then. And I think what's interesting, I mean, I always look towards even the 80s, a little bit sort of later on, where it's, where you sort of have that, sort of the classic vol au vent, which was, you know, a little bit dry, a little bit tasteless. And I think that's why I've brought a real selection for you to show you how far we've come. Another traditional one, obviously, being your pigs in blankets. I'm going to hold off for a second before I choke.
Because you've got to answer the question. So a pig in a blanket is a sausage, a little sausage wrapped up in bacon.
Yes.
How complicated? Maybe you bought this in a supermarket, but if you made it for yourself,
I made them, darling.
You made it marvellous. How complicated to make?
I mean, it's sort of on a scale of 1 to 10, probably a 1. You are literally wrapping bacon around a small little sausage and cooking them. I like mine super crispy, so I sometimes slightly overcook them a little bit. I thought I'd do a little ode to you and your Spanish heritage. And this is also playing on something that's become really popular, I would say, over the sort of last 5 to 10 years, which is a grazing platter or a grazing board. A lot of people are sort of stepping away from your classical canapés on a tray, and they're creating these sort of big wooden boards or tables, and it's just a selection of charcuterie, cheeses, olives, dried fruit, nuts, and the idea is you can get a plate and create your own little selection yourself, which I love, because then it means that you can make your own little combinations.
Well, here you've made a little skewer.
Yes, we've got some Serrano ham, some cheese, a little sort of marinated pepper, and an olive.
Right. That's going to take some eating, some digesting. Introduce, while I cope with this.
Yes.
Tell me about these arancini.
Yeah, so I thought I'd sort of also show a little selection of canapés that are from other countries. So we've got the Italian arancini. This is actually a bolognese arancini. So you have the rice, usually risotto rice. In the middle of the rice is sort of the cooked ragu, and then it is sort of formed into a ball once the rice is cooled down. You sort of get a little bit of rice, put a bit of ragu sauce in the middle, close it up, put it in, roll it in some breadcrumbs, and you fry it. Nothing better.
You said there was ragu in the middle, so is it like if I bit into it, would it?
I think you'll be okay. They've cooled down a bit.
I think I might put some pork in, and in order to do that, I need to ask you another difficult question. So what is that?
Yeah, so this is a little touch on sort of a Vietnamese classic. These are like little prawn toasts, with a little bit of spring onion and some sesame seeds. Again, I mean, you know, not the most traditional from sort of back in the day, but it just shows you how we can create really exciting little canapes, sort of touching on different cultures, which I love, and it gives you a little taste of the world at one party.
Do you know, I went to a lunch party yesterday, which was canapes, followed by cottage pie, followed by cheese. And I thought, what a brilliantly simple lunch party, because, of course, the host could be present the entire time, because the cottage pie just had to be brought from the oven, put on the table. The cheese was just a cheese board. Absolutely delicious, absolutely wholesome. But what made it was the canapes. And why? Because the canapes also enabled us all to chat and to mix. So they are the most marvellous things.
Also, one other thing that I have to say about canapes, there are a few little tips that I must give people super quickly. Make sure they're small, 1 or 2 bites. When you're at a party, you're standing, you've got a glass in one hand, then you need to hold it. There, OK, I would have preferred a glass of wine, but, you know, I can't stand these canapes where I have to put the glass down in order to eat the food. I want to do it all at once.
I couldn't agree more. You should never eat more than you can lift.
Exactly.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. Thank you, too, to all my guests for joining me on this crisp Sunday morning. It's a real pleasure to have shared this time with you. Next week, I hope to bring you a very special report from the Royal Collection of Art at Buckingham Palace. So please do come back for that. For now, I wish you a very charming Sunday afternoon. Up next, Dawn Neeson.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB.